Toji Fushiguro is arguably the character with the most aura in Jujutsu Kaisen, but the core of this character goes far beyond being strong and cool. He is possibly one of the most human characters in anime, because behind that coldness he exudes lies a very human trait, pride. Today we will understand how Toji paid the price for living a life based on pride. Toji wasn't born evil. No one is. His biggest problem was being born in the wrong place, with the wrong gift. In the world of Jujutsu Kaisen, few people were born with cursed power, so eventually those privileged individuals united and formed what we know as the three great families to maintain the pure bloodline and ensure that their descendants inherited the cursed power. Toji was born into the Zen'in Clan, one of the most traditional clans. As I just mentioned, the very existence of these families stems from their desire to preserve cursed power.
ところで君のお父さんさ、全員っていう呪術師の家系なんだけど、僕が低レベルのろくでなしで。
And there's a kind of anomaly that allows a sorcerer to be born without cursed power, the celestial body restriction. This essentially deprives you of cursed power, but in return grants you strength, speed, and perception far beyond the norm. This type of compensation is quite common in Jutsu. We see Maki with the same restriction, and Mechamaru, whose entire body was completely destroyed and non-functional, possessed immense cursed power. The point is, Toji was born without cursed power, and for a clan whose foundation is based on cursed power, Toji was an outcast, an embarrassment. The irony is that Toji possessed immense potential from a young age, unlike Maki, who was limited by being Mai's twin. But simply because he lacked the cursed power, his clan humiliated and mistreated him. The scar on his mouth is a result of that humiliation. It's ironic that when he's reborn and enters Dagon's domain, Naobito only recognizes him after seeing that scar. And when your childhood is based on humiliation, your mind learns to defend itself, trying to go unnoticed, and above all, you learn not to depend on anyone. And that's where Toji's pride is born. A child whose worth was denied from birth now seeks to prove it at any cost. But he doesn't necessarily want to prove it to the clan. He wants to prove it to himself, that he's capable of being the greatest without needing what others valued so highly, the cursed power. That's why, instead of seeking redemption or revenge like Maki did, Toji leaves and seeks to forge his own existence apart from everyone, as an assassin, as a man who answers only to himself. And that's why Toji fits the role of mercenary perfectly, because as a mercenary, you don't have to deserve anything. You just have to be effective. So Toji isn't a mercenary simply by profession. I see it as a reflection of the philosophy of life that Toji adopted. But that role, while protecting him, also becomes a prison, because that philosophy of life wasn't born of inspiration, it was born of desperation. This is a concept that stuck with me. I don't remember where I heard it, but to summarize, it's based on the idea that your actions or intentions can come from two different places: inspiration, born from serenity and passion, or desperation, born from impulse, trauma, etc. Well, Toji's identity is built from desperation. This means that he's now bound to that condition, to not depending on anyone, to proving himself, and to not caring about anything. Toji isn't proud because he thinks he's better. His stance is simple. If the world humiliated me, I won't give it access to me again. And if you stop to think about it, when someone grows up being humiliated for what they never had, they'll most likely start trying to compensate for those gaps. And in Toji's case, he compensated in the only way he knew how, with training, precision, and preparation. He became a sorcerer-killing machine, but as I said before, I don't think he necessarily wanted to prove anything to the clan. Above all, he wanted to prove himself. That's why he didn't wipe out the clan, but he did have an affinity for taking jobs related to killing sorcerers. That's not explicitly stated, but the fact that his nickname is the Sorcerer Killer, I think, is proof of that. After all, you don't get a nickname like that by chance. The point is, this is very important to understand why his fight against Gojo was so symbolic. On the surface, Toji accepts his job based on the pay. But if we consider that Toji is a proud person and that he needs to prove to himself that he is capable of defeating any sorcerer, the idea of being able to face the most powerful sorcerer, the chosen one, the only one who perceived his presence, was very tempting.
後にも先にも背後に立った俺が蹴取られたのはこの時だけだった。
So in my opinion, Toji didn't just accept that job for the money, but because it was the perfect opportunity to demonstrate what he always wanted, that the Jujutsu world is a lie and that he was always enough.
おそらく現代最強となった術師。否定したくなった。ねじ伏せてみたくなった。俺を否定した全員家、呪術界、その頂点を。
Because Gojo isn't just any adversary, he is the symbol of everything Toji despises. That is, he is the complete opposite of Toji. He is the prodigy, the chosen one, the untouchable, the protected one, while Toji is the mistake of the clan, the one born defective, the rejected one. So Toji accepts the challenge of facing Gojo, but he does so with the only logic the world has taught him. If no one was fair to me, then I shouldn't be fair to them either.
相手は五条家のボンだぞ。なかなか出て行ったところで何もできねえさ。
Hence Toji's absurd preparation. He devises a meticulous plan to tire Gojo out and catch him off guard. Toji isn't looking for a fair fight. He wants to make the untouchable bleed. After all, he's a professional mercenary. His job is to kill the celestial vessel. So he executes his mission perfectly. First, he manages to defeat Gojo, and here he finally has proof that someone can be the strongest without needing a cursed power. Here, Toji doesn't just defeat Gojo, he defeats the myth.
少し勘が戻ったかな。
Here, any proof his pride needed had been fulfilled, or at least that's how it seems on the surface. Because after killing Gojo, Toji finishes the mission by killing the vessel, straight to the point, because that's how Toji's mind works, from the advantage, from fulfillment. The role of mercenary is part of him, which is why he only allows himself to talk and boast once he has completed his mission, once he has achieved victory.
はい、お疲れ。解散、解散。
The funny thing is that this need to boast is closely related to the fact that he has to prove himself. It's a way of letting the world know his worth, because even if Toji tries to prove himself, that's not enough. If no one knows what you've done, then the feeling is that you haven't proven anything. And when he defeats Geto, he doesn't just leave him alive because he doesn't want the headache of curses, but because he had already completed his mission by killing the vessel, he had already proven himself by defeating Gojo, and he had already proven his worth by standing up to Geto.
親に恵まれたな。だが、その恵まれたお前らが呪術も使えねえ俺みたいな猿に負けたってこと。
But it's not all a bed of roses, especially when we talk about pride. Because pride protects you and makes you stronger, but it also condemns you in certain ways. And we can see this in the emptiness he feels after defeating Gojo and being rejected by the man who hired him.
お前と関わるのはな、仕事か地獄でだけって決めてんだよ。
It's a brief scene, but it shows that Toji is still empty, that his victory against Gojo wasn't a cure, it was a band-aid. After all, after defeating Gojo, his life went back to how it was before. But then something unexpected happens. The myth returns, but it returns different.
よう、久しぶり。
マジか。
大マジ。元気ピンピンだよ。
And Toji makes the biggest mistake you can make when you live by pride. He underestimates. He underestimates the fact that someone like Gojo has overcome death. At that moment, Gojo is no longer the chosen one, the one to whom life gave everything. Now he's a man who saw death with his own eyes and still survived. Now Toji is fighting someone who has just discovered his own limit and broken it.
だが死に際で掴んだ重力の確信。
As I said before, Toji had already had all the proof his pride needed to be calmed. But pride doesn't work that way. Pride demands more. It demands assurance. It demands finality. And from that moment on, Toji is no longer the cold, calculating killer. Now he's obeying an inner need, that no one can take that victory away from him. As if he left, the victory wouldn't matter.
違和感。違和感。
Even though all his instincts told him something was wrong, that he couldn't win, Toji stays. And because of his pride, he dies.
自分を肯定するためにいつもの自分を曲げちまった。その時点で負けていた。
And here we see the price of living a life where your foundation is pride and the need to prove you're enough.
それは捨てたろ。自分も他人も尊ぶことない。そういう生き方を選んだんだろうが。
Up until now, Toji only seems to be responding from pride, but something breaks through that defense. Megumi. Because Megumi is the flaw in Toji's system, because with a child you can't choose like a job. A child forces him to admit that he's not just a mercenary, forces him to admit that at some point he had a normal life, however fleeting. And that normal life can't be sustained when your philosophy is to owe nothing to anyone and live on the fringes. That's why Toji can't be a normal father, because being a real father demands things his pride considers intolerable, exposing yourself, failing, apologizing. So Megumi is the part of his life that doesn't fit with the role of a mercenary. And then comes Toji's most controversial decision.
俺のガキだが、ありゃ完全に持ってる側だ。5、6歳、術式の有無がはっきりしたら、お前らにやらんこともない。もちろん金次第だがな。
He sells him to the very clan that humiliated him his whole life. Some might think it's the lowest he could sink, but for Toji, it wasn't cruelty. He had already given himself body and soul to that lifestyle. He knew that keeping Megumi wouldn't redeem him. Instead, it would drag Megumi into that lifestyle as well. So he decides to leave Megumi with the Zen'in Clan because he knows that in this world, the strong survive, the weak are excluded. And Megumi had potential. With his inherited technique, he could be valuable. He could at least avoid the same fate.
俺にとってはゴミためでも、才能があれば幾分マシだろ。
And then we move to Shibuya, the place where the greatest act a man who lives by pride could perform is demonstrated. Toji doesn't return as a hero or a villain, not even a person with a score to settle. He returns as an object. The old woman's technique summons him using his grandson's body, like someone calling on an antique weapon for a dirty job. It's a cruel irony. The man who built his entire life to live apart from others returns exactly as something to be used for the benefit of others, but something happens that no one had foreseen. Toji's restricted celestial body is so absolute that it wins the technique. His physical form is not a mere vessel, it is an identity in itself, and the grandson's soul disappears.
誰に命令してんだよ。ババア。
From then on, Toji is no longer anyone's pawn, but he is also not the Toji he once was. There is no cold mercenary calculating his advantages. What remains is a predator in its purest form.
今、全員当時は器が壊れるまで本能のまま戦い続ける殺戮人形と化した。
He moves by instinct. He seeks out the strongest in the area. Not because he needs to prove anything, but because his body only recognizes one language, that of combat.
その牙は常に強者へと向かう。
And then he crosses paths with Megumi. There, for the first time since he appeared, Toji stops. He stops after fighting Megumi for quite some time, because until that moment he was still a killing machine. But after seeing his opponent's potential, he truly stops to look at who he is and realizes that this was his son. Then he asks him the question,
お前、名前は?
And when he hears Fushiguro, Toji feels relief. It's not a pretty moment of redemption. In that instant, he understands that Megumi didn't end up where he broke. At that moment, Toji ceases to be aimless movement and truly gains control over his pride.
全員じゃねえのか。よかったな。
It's not an emotional gesture. It's a clean, final cut. If Toji were still alive, his body would do what it always did, destroy. And for the first time, he no longer wants that. The fact that his son won't become him is enough. Toji never depended on a clan, on destiny, or on his power. Toji depended on his own identity. His pride had made him invincible, yes, but it had also turned him into a machine incapable of stopping. Facing Megumi, Toji regains a remnant of choice, not to live differently nor to redeem himself, only to avoid damaging the one thing that mattered to him, though he never had the courage to admit it.
もうどうでもいい。どうでもいいんだ。
恵みをお願いね。
Toji dies in the only way consistent with what he once was, choosing the moment to shut down, and perhaps that is his only true victory. What other Jujutsu Kaisen character would you like an analysis of? Let me know in the comments below. If you like these kinds of analyses, you might be interested in one of these.